My name is Eric Wright. I am an education specialist for the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. I'd like to thank everybody for showing up for our virtual movie night discussion tonight. Before we get started, though, I do just want to say a quick thank you to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation for their continued support. They do a great job in supporting us in all these free programs that we get to do virtually and in person. And I'd also like to say a quick thank you to our sponsor, Generac Power Systems. Without the foundation or Generac Power Systems, we would not be able to provide this virtual programming, not just movie discussion nights, but also trivia nights, our book talks, our curator conversations, our drink and draws. The list goes on and on and on. We do a lot of great events at the museum, and it's because of those two entities that we are allowed to do them. So thank you to both of them. So we are here tonight to talk about movies, this month's selection. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Lisa, I'm going to point at you. You're the one that suggested this. Am I wrong there?
Who?
You, Lisa. Didn't you suggest this
Yes.
movie? I thought you
Yes.
did.
Can you hear
So
me?
this is, yep, we sure can.
Okay. Yes.
So you got a nice headset this time.
It gives me privacy.
So we're looking at Female Agents from 2008. And I'm sure everybody's seen the film. This follows the story of 5 French female SOE agents who are trying to keep the D-Day landings at Normandy a secret and at the same time eliminate a top SS Nazi official. It's directed by Jean-Paul Salome, cinematography by Pascal Radau, and of course starring Sophie Marceau, who you might remember from Braveheart, where she played the French princess. And also, she was a Bond girl in one of Roger Dalton's Bond films, The World Is Not Enough. She played the character of Louise. She was the main female agent. This film also stars Julie Depardieu, who played Jean, and she was the prisoner who killed her pimp. Mary Gillian played Susie, and that was the SS officer's former lover. And we'll talk more about that situation as we go on. And then also Deborah Francois, who played Gail. She was the blonde religious gal who, well, you know what I'm talking about. It had a running time of just under 2 hours. This was shot entirely in France, and most of the principal photography was shot in the city of Paris itself. It was released in France on March 5th of 2008. Released in the U.S. on June 27th of 2008, distributed by TMF Distributors in France and Revolver Entertainment in the UK. And this is, I think, maybe only the second or third movie that we've watched that did not have a positive net in the box office. It had a budget of 19.6 million, and it only brought in 9.3 million. So it's about a $10 million loss to the studios on this one. Not to say it wasn't a good movie, it just didn't resonate at the box office. So first of all, we'll just go around real quick and get everybody's thoughts about, how did you like the movie? John, Karen, you're first on my list there, so we'll start with you.
Well, it was pretty good. Enjoyed the story. And we watch a lot of British detective shows, so working off of the subtitles wasn't a problem.
Oh, okay, yeah, good. That was one of my questions in there. Actually having to read a movie and watch it at the same time, it can be a little difficult and challenging. Lisa, how did you like the movie? You recommended it. I'm sure you liked it. You'd seen it previously, I'm gonna assume.
Yeah, I liked it. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I can't figure out this thing. So yeah, I liked it. I like the subtitles. I've actually kind of become zoned in on movies with subtitles, probably because it's kind of feels a little bit more realistic to me when I don't know and really know an actor playing a part. It's just these kind of unknowns to me. It feels a little bit more realistic. And also sometimes it's like in the beginning, you really have to try to figure out the scene and what's going on while the words are popping up. But as it goes, I almost forget that I'm actually reading what's going on. But I like that. I like the action in here and the connection to history, but liberties. So
yeah, and the director himself, I read a couple of interviews with him, and he said he would definitely not categorize this movie as a historical drama. He says it's total fiction, although it is based on some true events. and some, real life people. But he said his intent was not to make a historical drama piece. His intent was to make a thriller, and a fiction, a fun movie to watch. And I think that's what he did.
For 1 minute, for me, I went and read a little bit more, so that, it may be fictional, but then if you use that as a connection to learn something else. I noticed that one person in a review said that it was very far-fetched that the brother and the sister would be together, but that was actually true.
They said they wouldn't be together?
Yeah, they wouldn't be together. They wouldn't place them together, and they wouldn't do that. But that's actually a true part of the story. Yeah,
and when you're talking about resistance movements, particularly in France during World War II, you are going to see family members together. It's just unavoidable. Yeah, I don't know. I'd be interested in seeing who did that review. Chris, how about you? How'd you like the movie?
I liked it. I thought it was well done. I thought it was well edited too. I thought it fit together well. The scene where they're rounding up the women to do the mission. I had flashbacks to a couple of other movies. One was The Dirty Dozen, where they're rounding up, and the other was The Magnificent Seven, as they're going around. So the thing that I found disconcerting was how frequently they flipped from English to German to French, and particularly in cases where it didn't seem to be necessary. So, and the subtitles didn't bother me. So,
all right, and Bonnie, how did you like the movie?
I enjoyed it very much. The subtitles didn't bother me. That was okay. It took me a while to kind of tie things together. It seemed like it was jumping around. I started watching it for a second time. I think I would enjoy watching it again. And when I now see how things flow together.
Yeah, and especially, I don't know about everybody else. I don't mind subtitles either, but I have to be in a particular mood to watch a movie from start to finish with subtitles. You're basically reading a movie, and if I'm distracted by other things, I just can't do it. I'm not going to get the full grasp of the movie, and I'm not going to enjoy it as much. So yeah, watching it a second time, running through it, you already have a sense of the plot line, you already have a sense of the characters. So watching it a second time, it just will become more immersive and make far more sense. I thought this was a fine film too. It was a lot of fun to watch. I thought the acting was good. Like Chris said, the editing was fine. I did ask a question about some of the cinematography in here, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the first question I have, and this is kind of a new thing for us on here. Why, I don't know. Maybe it's my fault, and we'll have to take care of it a little bit better in the future. But did you find it like a refreshing change to have heroines instead of heroes? The emphasis on the female character, and how badass they were, and how much they contributed to the resistance effort. Did you find it refreshing to have that dynamic instead of, like Chris said, the Dirty Dozen, where it's all male lead cast?
Yeah, I like that. A different perspective on the things. And we had read read a book called Three Ordinary Women. It wasn't the best written book, but the story was very compelling. It truly was a true, a historical, the guy talked to people and so forth, and of some Dutch teenagers, 3 Dutch teenagers who were involved in the Dutch resistance in very similar, dangerous situations and so forth. And so, it was cool to see that on the big screen, the female resistance being portrayed that way. And Kathy has something to say, I think.
The one thing that distracted me a little bit as I watched it was I wondered why they didn't employ some disguises and that kind of thing. I mean, they never changed their hairstyles. They never, put on a pair of glasses or anything. And it just seemed so easy for them to get caught. That's why it was so tense to watch, because I just was sure they were going to get caught at any moment.
Maybe you bring up the perfect point there, Kathy. Maybe they did it like that to make you a little on edge. I was talking with Molly. Molly's on with us tonight, also another part of the education team at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. I was talking with her earlier about the movie today, and she brought up that exact same point. You know, she was like, oh, it's a great film. I really enjoyed it. But I was just wondering the whole time why they never try to disguise themselves, like you said, change their hair color, wear something different. You know, there was no sense of, I guess, the espionage part of it, I suppose.
Well, I thought, in that regard, I thought maybe the timeline would have had something to do with that. I mean, the timeline is like, what, less than a week or so before D-Day? You know,
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much time there would have been to pull all that together.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. And I never even thought of that, as I watched it twice already, and that just never occurred to me the whole time. I was just enjoying the action and the storyline. So yeah, that's very good observation on many people's parts.
I read in one of the reviews I read, it said that the director became obsessed with having the hairstyles of the women be authentic. And so maybe it was him. Maybe he didn't want to change them.
Yeah.
They spent enough time on hairstyles. They weren't going to change them.
We're not cutting your hair. We're not dyeing it. It looks great just the way it is. Make sure you get that 40s bouffant, and let's action. Let's do action. When we first meet Louise and her brother, we don't meet her brother right at the beginning of the film, but we do meet Louise. Her husband is killed right in front of her. She's definitely good with a rifle. She's taking out Germans left and right. And then that's the pre-credit scene. Oh, and I did want to say, I found the opening credit scene to be really well done. And I think it set the tone for the rest of the movie right from that credit scene. I was kind of impressed with that. Usually credit scenes are boring and really not worth mentioning at all. But I was kind of impressed with the credit scene and the way they did the photographs. Yeah, no, we need to go play some more. But after the credit scene, we meet Louise. Well, we've already met Louise, but we meet her and her brother. And they're talking about, obviously, Vichy France, and they're talking about their parents. And that kind of leads up to my next question on why was Louise surprised to see her brother at the beginning of the film? And what does her surprised reaction say about her interactions with her family?
Well, she was surprised to see him because she thought he bailed. She thought he ran away.
With mom and dad down to Vichy. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah. And just a bit of background, I'm sure everybody has a pretty good knowledge of this, but just in case you don't, Vichy France was the southern part of France during World War II. It was run by President Pétain, and they were basically Nazi collaborators. They were looked very unfavorably upon. They are still looked unfavorably upon by the French. But that whole southern part of France was an organized government recognized as the capital and the seat of government by the Germans in World War II. And it's referred to as Vichy France because it was seated in the town of Vichy itself. So yeah, her parents had fled to Vichy, and like Bonnie said, she thought maybe her brother had as well. What did it actually turn out? Where actually was her brother?
Being tortured by the Nazis.
Yeah, she couldn't have had that one more wrong, could she? Yeah, he's being tortured by the Nazis. That comes not too much further along in the film, and she flat out asked him if he was tortured by the Nazis. He wryly says yes, he was. And then we get to some torture scenes later on, and I do have a question about that as well. But I kind of want to go over the characters first real quick. We talked about Louise, but I also want to talk about Gail. And I always ask the question about our favorite characters in the film and why, and that'll come up at the end. But Gail, she's the with the short blonde hair. She's the one that meets Louise in the club at first. She sends her brother off. She says, let me handle this one. Turns out to be just the opposite. She's looking for something else, Gail is. But she uses religion as a motivator for the most part throughout this film. How do you think she used that as a motivator in the positive aspect? Well, and certainly in the negative aspect too.
Well, I think about the scene at the end where she undresses and she's almost puts herself in a crucifixion stance. And that I thought, well, she could have done that without having her clothes off. I thought that was a little bit of prurient interest on the part of the director. And I look at it was what released in 2007. And I thought, you know, that's like before the Me Too movement. And I thought, you know, really, why did we need to see her perky little breasts to know, you know, she's assuming this Christ-like open arms position. But I also didn't understand why Louise gave her the cyanide tablet. Maybe somebody could.
And that's a question that I have on here as well. And we definitely will get to that. And I want to find out everybody else's opinion on that as well. As, you know, why did she, you know, seemingly this traitor who ratted on everybody, why she gave her the out. But we'll talk about that in a second. Anybody else got any thoughts on Gail?
I didn't see her religion as a motivator. I saw more as a crutch for her.
Okay.
Trying to get through this whole thing. She kept falling back on it, but I don't think it motivated her forward in any real way.
Maybe I should have worded that a little different instead of a motivator. Well, I don't know how I would have worded that differently, but yeah, okay, I can see where you're coming from, Chris, for sure.
Maybe it was atonement.
That very well could be, and I want to. And as we're going through here, most of everybody, you know, who joins us every month, they know I'm taking notes the whole time. For those of you who don't join us regularly, I'm not ignoring you and I'm not ignoring the conversation. I'm taking notes. I always like to take notes and find out people's ideas and opinions and make sure that I don't forget them so I can keep them in mind when other movies come up. Atonement. That is a good observation, Bonnie. I'm curious, what other French heroine does this bring to mind? At least from my opinion, I don't know, maybe. I'm sorry?
Joan of Arc.
Exactly right. Even before she started talking, I just saw a Joan of Arc character. She hadn't even talked about any of her religion or anything like that. I just saw it within her face. Very young, very innocent. And then as her character developed, it was a total Joan of Arc character for me. I couldn't get away from that concept. And I guess maybe, Chris, that's what I was talking about when I said motivator. You know, she's an explosive expert. She's special forces. Maybe I said motivator because I'm thinking of her as, you know, really, you know, this is by God's will that I'm going to go out here and I'm going to be able to do these things against the Nazis. It turns out she didn't really achieve all that, but at least she got into the action. And then the last, the last question I had about the female agents as well. And I could not get this out of my head the entire movie, right from the very get-go, it bothered me. Why do you think this group of female agents needs a male to lead them?
Well, maybe it's not so much that they were female, but they were kind of inexperienced and in some cases, you know, not totally willingly going along, you know. And I wonder if maybe they thought, you know, well, we're gonna have a group of people with, you know, very little experience and, you know, very little, maybe little motivation except the money and the, you know, the fact that all the different bribes they offered them. So I don't know. I thought maybe that was the reason.
I think that some of it is, like we talked about earlier, it's completely fictional, but they're, like I said, that they did both work together, and the brother Claude was a scientist, and he was worked for the scientist group, and she got into a different group, but she didn't care for it, and that's how she came back around with her brother. But at that time, the men were mostly the organizers, and the women did like courier and setting up safe places and that type of thing. But she supposedly, she and another woman were the very first female resistance to be parachuted into France.
The
I
book
think
that-
I think she's based on a character, Mise Biassac, Biassac, is who she's based on.
that book that Kent mentioned earlier, The Three Ordinary Girls, in the Netherlands, there were male leaders in the resistance who kind of helped coordinate things. So it could just be based on fact of the circumstances of the times, that the men were more in the trusted leadership positions, and then they went out and recruited somebody that they thought wasn't going to get caught.
Yeah, and I mean, you're right. They could be trying to stick more to, for lack of a better term, to historical fact. I just thought, you have Sophie Marceau, who's this sniper, and she's just a killer. She's just a flat out killer. Gail was trained, although she hadn't been out in the field to actually do it, but she has all this training, special forces training, explosive training behind her. And I was just like, oh, great. Here's this chance to have a really great, female-led movie. And the females are being led by some guy.
My sense was that it wasn't so much that they needed a male lead. It was that the circumstances here were Pierre was the only one who had been to Germany and been tortured and had been through, had that kind of contact, but he'd also been back in Germany and had been part of this group that knew what the overall mission was, and none of these other people did. I mean, they were part of the resistance, but the resistance didn't necessarily know what the overall strategy was going to be, particularly for D-Day. And Pierre did. I mean, I think it would have been hard to create a female character that had all those ingredients.
Yeah. And Eric, getting back to what you were saying about, having have a man lead, I was just reflecting during this movie on my experience in the 70s. And in 1973, I was in Army ROTC, and I was in the first class where women could take it for more than just gym credit, because at that point they were so desperate for people. I mean, the forces that were in Vietnam at the time were, a lot of those people they were sweeping up with the draft were, drug addicts and alcoholics or mentally ill or any number of things. And I know I tried for a scholarship before that in New York, and well, actually New Jersey, St. Peter's College, and I didn't get it. And the woman came out afterwards and she shook my hand. She said, "Oh, you're very brave." And I didn't know what she was talking about. And I realized then, I mean, it was, I heard something recently, I guess it was right at that point in 73 when they were so desperate for sober, usable people that they said, "Oh, well, I guess we'll just take these women." And so when you think about it, it was 1973, and they took two women. I was at State University College at Potsdam, where Renee Fleming went to school. She was a few years behind me, but there were the two of us from the State College and two women from Clarkson College of Engineering, which is where they had Army ROTC. And that's all they allowed. But I was very proud that we got it, and we got more than just gym credit. And so when you look at that 40s and that 1973, we didn't really come that far. But I think now we've gotten
you're right.
further.
Yeah, in that, roughly 30-year time period. Yeah, advancements hadn't been made too much. I just thought the director missed a good opportunity. He could have, I think he could have did away with the male lead there and either replaced him with a female or just turned over, the whole ensemble to the 5 females themselves. But, once again, this is 2008. So what is that, 10, 14 years ago? A lot's happened in 14 years. Mindsets have certainly changed in the last 14 years. But, I just kind of thought he missed an opportunity. And a couple of you had mentioned the fact that some of these agents weren't really agents. They were coerced or pressured one way or another into this mission. So that maybe, the male lead was there because he did have that experience. He had been to Germany. He does know some of the operational background of what's about to happen. But the techniques and the pressure that was used by Pierre and Louise as they're recruiting these other females. Do you think that that these techniques were ethical, even for the time period?
Well, the one that I found, I mean, I wasn't too bothered by some of the techniques. I mean, the woman on death row or whatever, the prostitute on death row, commuting her sentence, that would seem like a normal way you might convince someone to do something really dangerous, or, you know, to help you in wartime. The one that bothered me was using the colonel's former, you know, lover to, you know, to try to seduce him and so forth. That seemed unethical, probably for any time period, especially kind of doing it, you know. I mean, the other women didn't know at first that was who they were talking about, was the colonel, you know. I mean, the whole way they handled her situation bothered me. The rest of them, I thought, you know, maybe in wartime, yeah, some of those ways you might use some of those methods to try to get people, you know, you really needed to cooperate.
I thought the unethical part was lying to them about what the actual mission was.
Yeah.
Right. I was even a little upset.
Yeah.
They get the geologist, they get him out, and you're like, okay, they did it. No, now it's time to go to Paris and eliminate this officer. It's like, wait a minute, you can't do that.
Yeah, I had read the outside of the DVD, and it said, you know, on a mission to rescue, you know, to something and kill try to kill a colonel, a Nazi colonel or something. So as soon as that happened, I said, nah, I know there's more to this mission from having read it.
I didn't read the DVD cover or the description on it before I watched it. I just cut it on and I was like, all right, here we go. Yeah,
That's probably a good idea.
Shaking my fist at Pierre there for a few minutes. And yeah, I mean, you're right. There wasn't with what was her name? Jean. With Jean, it seemed to me like they had the authority to commute her sentence if she played along, but they didn't tell her that until the very end. She was telling them to, you know, to go hang yourself. I'm going back to jail. I'm not gonna play with you fools. And it wasn't up until the very last moment when Louise told her that they could commute her sentence that she's like, okay, well, now I'll do it. So I thought, you know, maybe they just opened with that and saved everybody a lot of hassle. And then of course with Susie as well. And I even asked the question later on in my questions, you think that Susie was being used by the SOE because of her past relationship with Heinrich? It's like as soon as I hit the send button on those questions, I was like, that was the stupidest question ever. Of course they were using her. Why did I even ask that? I wasted a whole question on something that was pretty obvious.
Well, particularly with getting the prostitute in, that reminded me again of Dirty Dozen, where they said, if you survive this, you'll get it. Your sentences will be commuted. You'll be freed. So it doesn't strike me as none of that struck me as really coercive in a wrong sense, given the stakes that were at issue. I mean, yeah. There's a whole cost benefit thing, I think, that goes on at that point. And the cost was the loss of, if they didn't do it, they might wind up with not having a successful invasion.
No, and that is a good point. Although they didn't lay that out, there certainly is that undertone there. And you know, I didn't think of that as another point I didn't think about. Maybe I should have picked a different time to watch this movie. Things I'm not picking up on it I usually do, but that's why I have all you great people here, because you back me up and find those things that I fail to get sometimes. And yeah, we keep going back to the Dirty Dozen. This from the very opening scene, this struck me as kind of a Dirty Dozen style movie. Lisa, you said you read a lot of reviews, and I'm sure some of you other folks did as well. And it seemed like that was a recurring thread through all the reviews, that they keep harkening back to some Dirty Dozen reference or something like that. While this was a good movie, it was certainly no Dirty Dozen. But You know, that's just my personal opinion.
When you mention Dirty Dozen, Eric, it makes me think of we have an outdoor film festival occasionally at a park. I'm in Alexandria, Virginia. I'm in
Okay.
I'm right around the corner from Mount Vernon Estate, and just a little south of that is a park called Fort Hunt Park, and that's where they call it Nazis on the Potomac. That's where the German POWs, the high value ones, were kept during World War II. But at Fort Hunt Park, because of its historical association, most of the buildings are gone. There are a few things left, and there's a tour. But they had a film festival, and they showed The Dirty Dozen and a couple of other films. But it's a very interesting place. So that when I think of The Dirty Dozen now, I always think of Fort Hunt Park. But I thought I'd also mention that because if you go to the C-SPAN website, or I guess probably online is the easiest way to catch it. But there is a on C-SPAN, there's a regular program called Q&A, and they had one called Nazis on the Potomac, and I happened to hear it on the radio. We have C-SPAN on the radio here in DC, and I heard the end of the interview, and I thought, oh darn, I really wanted to hear the whole thing. And lo and behold, when I checked the TV schedule, it was there, and I recorded it, thanks to the magic of DVRs. But yeah, now whenever I think of The Dirty Dozen, I think of that. But you know, you mentioned earlier also torture, and some of the scenes, I don't usually like any scenes of graphic violence. I have a friend who really does, and I'm going to tell him about this film and tell him he would really enjoy it. But because there were a number of times I had to turn away and like pet my dog and, you know, just distract myself. But it brought to mind what we've done in Guantanamo Bay, and the things that we've done, the waterboarding, especially when they showed those scenes of the Louise being waterboarded in front of her brother. I thought, you know, so we're no better than that. I mean, and there's still, what are there, like 40 people left there at Guantanamo Bay, including the perpetrator, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. And but some of the people, like I know there have been films and things on the Mauritanian, the guy from Mauritania who was kept there, and there's no evidence that he did anything. And now some of these people are in countries like, there was a big story in the Washington Post recently about one of these men who was released to Slovakia. And it was like, I think it was a front page below the fold story in the Washington Post within the last couple of weeks. And this poor guy is there in Slovakia and, you know, doesn't speak the language. He has no work. He can't get food. And he wrote to the person in Slovakia, and they said, oh, well, we'll see about sending you back to solitary confinement at Guantanamo Bay. So the poor guy has two choices, you know, and it's like slim to none. But anyway, the torture scenes bothered me. I mean, I know that they had to be in there to make it thrilling and to get the attention of some viewers who like graphic violence. But and the last thing I wanted to mention is the title. I thought that the title, Female Agents, I didn't think that was a very I can't imagine especially some guy running out, I want to see female agents, you know. But the French title translation is much more interesting, because the French title is something about women in the shadows, right?
Yeah.
Women in the shadows, and sur l'ombre. I mean, women in the shadows, or I thought that would have been more interesting. But
Shady Women is the direct translation. So that's no good either. Shady Women. That strikes me as comedy.
Might have attracted more men.
Would have more of a box office, right? I thought I had asked a question in here about the torture, but I'm not seeing it. But Audrey, I'm right there with you. I'm usually, I can handle war violence to a certain extent. But when it comes to individuals' pain and suffering, I can't seem to stomach that most times.
Yeah.
We saw some of that just a couple of months ago when we watched the name escapes me now, the 9/11 movie.
Zero Dark 30?
Zero Dark 30, yes.
Oh, yeah.
And you do have those torture scenes in there in the very beginning. And I thought the torture scenes in this movie were at least on par to those torture scenes in Zero Dark 30, if maybe not a little more intense. But I didn't shy away. I didn't have to turn my head for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe it was because I was too busy staring at subtitles. Who knows?
Yeah. But
But,
pulling out of the woman's fingernails, I mean, that just,
oh man, it's just
I was like, oh.
things like that. I can stand more violence. I can stomach that, but individual pain and suffering, I just can't. Did anybody else have any problems or no problems at all with the torture scenes?
Well, I always have problems with just, as she said, graphic violence, kind of in general. So I often find myself turning away, but that's just me. I'm just kind of always been kind of squeamish.
I thought it also underscored just the evil of the Nazi leaders there, that they were not impacted at all by ordering this torture or witnessing it or anything. Just their cold-hearted devotion to their cause.
Yeah,
Did you
Sorry,
see
go ahead, Lisa.
did you see the lady, the German lady sitting inside the door,
Yes.
who was kind of oblivious to everything that was going on? She was there, but it didn't faze her at all. And the torture does bother me, but also knowing that that's how ruthless they were, it seemed appropriate. It didn't seem just thrown in there. It seemed appropriate. And just
I agree with that.
And just to connect, today is Holocaust Remembrance Day.
It is, as a matter of fact. Thank you for bringing that up. I totally forgot about that. I mean, I had read about it earlier today, but since then it has slipped my mind. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Actually, it was yesterday. It was Holocaust Remembrance Day, the 27th.
Yes.
And the campaign they had this year with the hashtag was We Remember. And I don't know if anybody goes on the Beams platform. It's spelled like Beam Me Up Scotty, BEAMZ. They had some very interesting programs. They had one yesterday. This woman who does programs from Bulgaria. And it was fascinating. She toured a little museum that's there in a town called Kukendale in Bulgaria. And she even said they had before the Nazi time period, they had 50,000 Jews in Bulgaria. And now they have about 1,600, probably less because that number was from their 2011 census. They just did another census, but they don't have the figures out yet. So only 1,600 Jews left in Bulgaria, and yet they have, she said they've got the third biggest synagogue in Europe, which was modeled on the one in Vienna that was destroyed. But it was a very beautiful program she did with the, with the rock and the candle. But I don't know, to me, see, I went to another Beams program that was in Berlin, and the guy was showing the Reichstag with a banner that said, "We remember." And I thought, well, I hope you do. I mean, if anybody needs to remember, they do. But saying that, I'm married to it.
Comment after comment in that, but I won't.
Speaking of the woman who was sitting there inside the doorway, Lisa mentioned, what struck me about that was that I kind of thought of that as kind of symbolic of the sort of administrative state of the Nazi regime, where they kept very meticulous records, and that she was there to keep a record of this torture, the way in a smaller scale of what they kept the records of the extermination camps.
That's actually a good point. And I'm making comparisons right away. You wouldn't see us in Guantanamo Bay if there was anything like that going on. It was the prisoner and the operator. You're not going to have any extra people in there making notes, documenting in any way, shape, or form. Not at all. But you're right. At Nazi Germany, they were very thorough. They were very well documented, and yeah, that very well could be that she's just sitting there making sure that, oh yeah, appropriate paperwork's done, signed, send it off.
Name, address, telephone number.
I hate to say it, they weren't official.
Yeah, the medical experiments with Dr. Mengele. I mean, they have tons of documentation, and hopefully maybe something good might come out of all that tragedy, but.
Moving along to the rest of their time in Paris. Oh, no, wait, I want to ask this question too. This is another thing that bothered me throughout the whole film. Well, not throughout the whole film, from halfway through on. Why didn't they just off the geologist instead of taking so much time and care to get him out of the country? Why didn't they just put a bullet in him?
Well, he probably had information. He had been sent there to gather information, and it sounded like he had some. Now, what I whether it needed to be physical or I don't know, it was the sand that he had to have or something, but he probably had enough information he could have helped them. He probably had information that could have helped us, so.
And quite honestly, we wouldn't have half a movie if they did that.
Yeah.
That SS guy, he felt there was something going on in Normandy, but he couldn't sell it to the guys above him.
Right.
So-
He
so-
wanted a geologist.
Yeah, so he was trying to keep that thread and dig deeper and find out, because he was trying to sell that idea that nobody would buy from him.
Yeah, exactly right. But I just, the whole time, I'm just like, it would have been so much easier if you just put a bullet in his head and move on. Done deal.
But wouldn't that put them on their level? See, we're looking at the very honorable English and comparing it with the murderous Nazis.
Yeah.
It's drawn that split.
Yeah,
Well-
I don't know. I mean, and you're probably right. I'm just thinking too cynically, I guess. Welcome to my world. I got to deal with this thought process 24/7, and sometimes it does not always serve me well. And kind of along similar lines, why, but kind of the opposite, why did Pierre try to kill Gail when they were both under Nazi control? There was a few moments when nobody was looking and he tried to choke her to death. He did not succeed, but why did he try to do that? Was it out of revenge for outing them, or was it out of mercy, do you think?
I thought maybe he thought she still had more information, that keep her from talking anymore.
Oh, so not revenge, not mercy, but to keep a cap on.
Prevention.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, all right. Anybody else? Is that the kind of the general consensus?
That's what we thought.
I
yeah.
took it as mercy. I felt like he was being her cyanide pill.
And then she finally did get her cyanide pill from Louise. Why do you think Louise gave up her cyanide pill? She's certainly bound to need it at some point. Why would you give somebody an easy out who had ratted on you, given you up?
Because Louise was pregnant and she and her husband had tried to have children. I think that's what it was. And then
Okay.
of course, it was very poignant at the end of the film where they had the one sentence that she lived until 98 and she died childless. I prefer the word child-free. I'm child-free and I think that's better, but they said childless. So I guess when they were kicking her in the stomach, probably she lost the child then.
Yeah,
But
that's what I assumed.
That's what I thought. I thought like you did that. I thought, oh, it's kind of an easy out. And then I thought, no, she still just has, maybe she has more religion than the blondie because she was having faith in the future that maybe the child would live and go on. And that's the best, to me is the best response to the Nazis and their brutality. Because I'm from a Polish, Jewish, Irish Catholic family in New York. And we have a favorite saying, which is a Jewish saying, which is, they didn't kill us, let's eat. So that's used for many occasions. So I'm a little zoftig, but that means I'm still alive. So, but yeah, I mean, I look at, now and looking at what's happening in the Ukraine, it's very frightening to watch that. And I don't know, I think I'm more worried than most of the Ukrainians that are there, but I go on some Zoom calls and Beams calls with some people in Kiev, and the young people are out and they're partying and they're going to different sites. They're going to the glass bridge and they don't seem worried. The older people are going to the ATMs and the banks and they're buying kasha. which is buckwheat porridge, and I hate it. I hate kasha. I lived with a Ukrainian American whose parents and grandparents were displaced persons from Ukraine during the war, and the mother and the grandmother would be up at 2 a.m. They had nothing else to do, and they'd be up till 2 a.m. and they're making kasha at 2 a.m. I was like, buckwheat porridge at 2 a.m. Spare me. I don't like it any time of the day, but
Go ahead, Lisa.
I think that I kind of felt like she was the mother hen, and she felt responsible for bringing those girls together and the mission. And even that part where she said it, you wouldn't have done this to men. I mean, I really feel she felt a responsibility to them, and so
Is their leader.
that's why, yes.
And that was one of the questions I had on here was about that quote. You wouldn't have done this to us if we were men. What does she mean by that? And is she right?
I didn't think she was right. I think they would have done exactly the same thing to a bunch of guys. They would have, in a similar situation, they would have held back the actual mission, and then at the end told them, we got some more stuff to do. What the men's reaction would have been might have been different, but I don't think they would have. I think they would have done the same thing to a bunch of guys.
Yeah, I would agree, Chris, absolutely. We are getting a little bit short on time here. I want to talk about the filmmaking process itself. Set designer Sebastien Monteau-Allure. I'm not familiar with any of these folks, the cinematographer, the director. I don't get an opportunity too often to watch French films or European films in general. But the set designer, he turned modern day Paris into this 1940s occupied city that, you would recognize immediately from newsreels. How did, and I've already set you all up. How do you think he did in his job as turning this modern city into 1940 occupied Paris?
And it was done without CGI?
No, it was not. Now that is my opinion. Let me state that. That is not a fact. That is my opinion. My opinion is that they did it with CGI, and I'll explain further if y'all want me to. And it has to do with the first question I asked about the filmmaking process, which is the high frame rate. High frame rates are usually done. Okay, 99% of all the movies that everybody on this call has seen throughout their whole lives is done on a regular film frame rate, which is 24 frames per second. A high frame rate usually suggests about 48 frames per second, not only shot, but projected as well. And the reason that they do this is because you get a sharper, clearer image. And it is much better to project your CGI onto the film itself when you shoot with a higher frame rate because of the clarity that you get. And so I say that there was CGI in this film because it is very difficult nowadays to be able to recreate the automobiles, the banners, some of the scenery that you would find in occupied Paris, Berlin, Germany at the time, Blitz, London, wherever. It's going to be very hard to come up with all these materials in real life to be able to project these images to the audience. And so that's why I say I think there was CGI in there, because you're not going to be able to find all those automobiles. You're not going to be able to find all the little pieces that make up the set design when you're talking about something from World War II.
No wonder it lost money. If they did do it authentically, that's perhaps why they lost money. The cost of acquiring all those props and vehicles and so on.
Well, 1906, that's not a whole lot as far as a movie budget goes. I've seen movies with far less technical prowess that were made for a lot more. And I'm not criticizing as far as the CGI goes. Sometimes you have to do that. I don't like the look of the high frame rate per second. And if anybody has ever seen the Hobbit series, not the Lord of the Rings, but the Hobbit, Peter Jackson's Hobbit, that's shot at a high frame rate as well. And usually what you get is you do get this clarity, but you also get something that looks like it's like an ABC soap opera, or maybe something that's shot on a home video camera. It just doesn't seem to have that striking, presence that a regular frame rate per second film would have. Now, James Cameron, who is the Avatar director, we have new Avatar movies coming out over the next few years. He's experimenting with even a higher frame rate of 60 frames per second. And that's because his movies are almost 100% CGI. And so to really get the clarity of those images or those effects, he's experimenting with higher frame rates per second.
That sounds kind of like the criticism that audiophiles level against CDs versus vinyl.
Yeah, you don't get to hear the needle going across. You don't get to hear all those little pieces on a CD. You're absolutely right. That was a big argument from audiophiles for a long time. And we get the same argument from cinemaphiles as well. There's a lot of people that do not like the high frame rate per second. They absolutely abhor it.
On the set design, there are a couple of things that struck me. One thing in particular, I was surprised to see some German signs in Paris, road signs. There seemed to be some signs that were actually written in German as opposed to French, and that kind of struck me as odd. I don't know whether that was true that they did that back then, but it didn't look French or French enough.
I can imagine that the Germans would have had to have some sort of signs up for them, so they could tell where they're going.
Yeah, maybe, but
then the French would have ripped them right down, I suppose, too. I did have the very fortunate luck of meeting a female resistance member when I was living in Paris back in 2007, just right before this movie came out. I was at Lafayette Plaza for the 4th of July. Parisians celebrate the 4th of July almost as much as the Americans do. And there was a celebration going on down there. It was the end of the parade and remarks were being made by the mayor of Paris. And I happened to start speaking to this elderly lady. And it turns out she was a resistance member. Just outside of Paris, she would go and retrieve down pilots and hide them until the Allies could come and get them back and take them back to safety. And just listening to her talk about Paris at that time and all of the stuff that she did, most of this movie, I just kept flashing back to talking with her. And so, yeah, the resistance members probably would have ripped them down just as fast as they put them up. But I would imagine that the Germans would have had to have some sort of signage, throughout, just so they could tell where they're going. Paris is a very confusing city as it is. Sorry, Chris, did you have another point to make, or did I just totally step all over you?
No, that was fine. There was one other scene that reminded me of what was it, Paths of Glory, and that was the wide scene towards the end when the cars are coming, when they're bringing the cars around across that huge plaza. And it kind of reminded me of a similar scene in where they're in Paths of Glory, where they had that wide plaza where they had all the troops lined up and so on. Yeah.
So we only got about 5 minutes left. I do have time for 2 more questions, and I want to kind of go back to that high frame rate per second. Did anybody else notice how just the film looked different? It didn't look like a movie that you regularly watch?
No,
No?
Not really.
No? Okay. All right.
I'm just curious, would that make a difference? I mean, we're watching it all on the screens here on our computers or whatever. Would that high frame rate make a bigger difference if you were seeing comparing it with in a theater?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because like I said, not only do they shoot it at the high frame rate, but then in the theaters, they project it at the high frame rate as well. So there would be a visual difference if you saw this in the theater as opposed to watching it on your TV or your computer.
Yeah.
You're still having it filmed in that high frame rate, so you're going to get some of that effect, but it's not being projected at that high frame rate. So you also lose that effect is a little diminished because of that.
And that might be why it didn't. I mean, I didn't have a big difference just watching it on a computer monitor.
Yeah, as soon as it came on, not the first scene, And I started to notice a little bit in the credits, but that post-credit scene with Louise and her brother, it was immediately apparent to me. And I was like, oh, high frame rate. Oh my God. Okay.
Just for kicks, and this is a true apples and oranges comparison, I looked up just now, what was the frame rate of the famous Zapruder film of the Kennedy assassination? 18.3. So that's, I mean, there's obvious differences between amateur home movies in 1963 and, modern day theatrical films, but that just gives you the relative numbers of when you're speaking towards the topic of the clarity of the image.
Yeah, exactly right. And I'm glad you looked that up. That's excellent. Because I'm sure I could have figured it out if I would have thought about it. I guess I never really thought about it. But to have something lower than 24 frames per second, yeah, that's wow. That's when you start to get into, if we had some actual filmmakers here, this whole conversation would just go off the rails completely, because they would start getting technical about, all the little aspects and details that I know nothing about. Maybe I should go to film school. Maybe I should stop working at.
Well, that was Peter Jackson's challenge in They Shall Not Grow Old, because of all the varying frame rates. He had to.
I never even thought of that. That's a great point, Chris.
That's one of the things that made that movie so that documentary basically so extraordinary, was the technology that Peter Jackson brought to it.
Yeah, I just watched it a few nights ago too, and I didn't even think about frame rate. That was not even a concern. I don't know. I just love watching World War I stuff. It's fantastic.
And you'll have to do it again now to watch for the frame rate.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely going to go back and start doing some research on that. I'm very curious now. Last question, my favorite question, and we'll start with John and Karen because I'm just going down my list here. Who was your favorite character and why?
It's got to be Louise.
Yeah.
It's just,
Yeah, I agree.
I just loved her passion for what she was doing and her dedication and what she had to go through. So definitely Louise.
Lisa?
I really like Louise. She was strong. She was level-headed. She did really good acting. But I will also want to put in some credits for Jean, the from the prison. I really liked that character, how she was on her toes. She was quick on her toes. I like that where she wrote with her lipstick on the newspaper and held it up, and she was just quick on her toes, kind of fixing everything, every situation that came up.
They kind of have a toughness that the other girls didn't have and a bit of street smarts.
Yes.
Yeah. Chris?
I have to go with Louise too. I mean, she was sort of the linchpin for the whole thing. If she hadn't done the work, the whole thing would have fallen apart.
Audrey?
Hate to sound redundant, but I guess Louise. But I also liked Gail. Maybe that scene at the end. I don't know, that kind of a crucifixion scene. That sort of it was different.
I'm sorry, me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I like Jean. It's hard not to like Louise, but I thought Jean was my favorite character because, she started out, she was just trying to save her own life to get on the mission in the first place, and then ended up sacrificing herself at the end. And in the middle, she was running off with the money or whatever, when she found out the mission was going to be longer, just for her to develop that way, and then sacrifice herself at the end. And she was played by Eric, you might know, or some people may know, the daughter of Gerard Depardieu.
Yeah.
I think it's Julie Depardieu. Legendary French actor. I noticed in the credits, so I immediately Googled, and his daughter.
Oh.
Did the same thing.
He's a French actor that I've known for, not like known personally, but known for a while. He's in a bit of trouble right now, though. He's in a spot of bother, both with the government and the authorities in France.
Yeah,
Unfortunately.
didn't he,
Unfortunately, he's done some bad things, it sounds like.
didn't he expatriate himself to Russia?
I think he did, right along with Steven Seagal, yeah.
Also, Marceau, is she in relation to Marcel Marceau?
That I don't know.
Mm.
That I don't know. I just, as soon as I saw her, I was like, oh, she's from Braveheart. I thought she did a fantastic job in Braveheart. I think she's a fantastic actor. I really do. Bonnie, we'll get to you last. Who was your favorite character and why?
Well, I'll echo what Lisa said, was that, I mean, I like Louise, but I also like Jean a lot for the reasons that have already been stated, so.
All right. Well, that is the end of our movie discussion tonight. It was a great discussion, and I want to thank everybody for showing up. Of course, I am completely unprepared, and I can't even remember what next month's movie is, but I'm going to look real quick. Somebody's going to tell me.
Shout at the
Devil.
Shout at the Devil. Okay, I was thinking it was Free State of Jones. That must be March.
Yeah.
Could you repeat that?
You know, I'm really excited about the movies that were selected this year. And once again, I want to thank those of you who sent along recommendations. I think there's only one movie out of this whole year that I've seen previously. All the other films are brand new films for me. So I'm really excited about, you know, seeing a whole new batch of movies. Shout at the Devil, I had not seen that one before, and I still haven't seen it yet. I don't know if anybody else has you know, gone ahead and did a sneak peek or an advanced viewing of it. Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking with everybody about that. As everybody, you should have noticed anyway, I'm getting a lot better on getting my questions out there a lot sooner, so you have a lot more time. I'm giving you more than a weekend to catch up. I'm usually giving you three weeks, maybe the whole month sometimes. And so I will have those questions for Shout at the Devil. Maybe I'll just sit down and watch it this weekend and craft questions and have them out to everybody by the 1st. February is a short month as it is, so I need to get that done quickly. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. I'm glad everybody enjoyed the movie, and I hope to see everybody next month. Also, don't forget, you can also find all of our other virtual events that we do on our website, wisvetsmuseum.com. We have trivia coming up in a couple weeks. We've got a book talk by a gentleman named Mark Trapp, who's going to be talking about American pilots flying for the French in World War I. Back with the French theme again. But you can always find all of our programming on wisvetsmuseum.com.